What is up, everybody? This is Marshall Lee of DonkeyJawProjects.com, and today we're going to talk about what our stories are actually telling, what our stories are saying. How do we approach writing a comic book, or even, you know, doing the art and all that? Because storytelling is wrapped up in all of it. How do we approach that, and are we trying to put a message in what we're doing or not? Yeah, so that's what we're going to be talking about. Thank you guys for already joining in the chat. You guys are so awesome. And we're going to get this thing going. But first, let's talk. Mike, we, I'm like stumbling through this intro for some reason, but Mike is here, Mike Emeritz. And Mike, where can people find you?
I am hiding in the shadows these days, but you can generally find me usually on Instagram at Mike Emeritz, or on Facebook at, I believe, Michael Emeritz. And pretty soon you'll be able to find me at sisypheancomplex.com. I'm not going to tell you how to spell it. It's a challenge for me too, but yeah, that's pretty much where you can find me. And
Awesome.
YouTube.
Awesome. Yeah, and I have the Instagram linked already, and I would definitely say, just keep an eye on it. Even though he's not doing a lot, there's things brewing, and I think there's going to be some pretty awesome stuff coming, shortly. So, talking about writing comics, I always love being able to chat with you about that, Mike, because you really you get deep into it, and I feel like I can always learn something when I'm chatting with you about it. And one thing I've heard from you recently is you've been talking about this idea of when you write a story, having it be kind of more of a discussion or a conversation, as opposed to trying to be. I'd love to hear you talk about your kind of viewpoint on that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it actually kind of has a lot to do with what we were just talking about before we went on the air. So I guess the simplest way to kind of just introduce the topic is every story has a message. Every story has a theme, something that you're trying to convey to an audience. I mean, most of the time there are a lot of stories that are just stories for the sake of story, but the ones that resonate with people, the ones that you want to tell because you have something you want to say, I feel like the most effective way to deliver that kind of message is through a conversation rather than beating someone over the head with it. Or I'll give you an example. So, and I'm not saying that I fall on one side or the other on any of these topics, but if you look at America right now, in fact, like all across the world, everybody's very divided. It's a very polarized world we're living in right now. And everybody's kind of screaming at each other from opposite ends. You should think this way. No, you should think this way. And a lot of times when that starts happening, you start seeing a lot of comics, entertainment in general popping up that they say that they're trying to deliver a message, that they're trying to get the message out. They're trying to raise awareness, that kind of thing, for their particular view, whatever it may be. So we'll try and pick one that's maybe a little lighter. Let's see. Well, let's just pick a made up one so we don't have to get too political. Let's say there's an argument between whether you should eat blue fruit or whether you should eat red fruit. Okay. Damn it. I picked political colors. I didn't mean to do that, but whatever. Purple and green. All right. So purple fruit and green fruit. Well, the purple fruit people and the green fruit people, both of them, when they're trying to convince you, they tend to just flat out smack you on the face with that message. Like, this is a comic about why you should eat purple fruit. Read it and be educated. Well, the green fruit people aren't even going to buy it. They're never going to touch it. They already think what they think. They know what you're trying to tell them, or at least they think they do. They're never going to listen to your message, period. So it becomes a bubble. It's an echo chamber. You're only preaching to the choir when you do that. My feeling is, if you really want to get a message across, you have to have a conversation. You're not going to have a conversation if you come in wearing armor ready for battle. The opposition, the people you're trying to get that message across to that really need to hear it, they're going to ignore you, or they're going to get ready for a fight, but the message isn't going to be received. So I'm not saying to hide it or bury it or be manipulative in any way. I'm saying start a conversation, present two sides to the coin, try and research the other side of what it is that you're trying to say and present that too. Let people come to their own conclusions. When you pigeonhole people into these little boxes and you create archetypes like the the opposite opinion is the evil character or whatever, you immediately turn off the people that you're trying to get through to, So I don't know, maybe I've gone on a little bit too much, but that's essentially what I'm getting at when I say have a conversation in the first place is, you want to present your ideas in a way that the person who's reading can come to their own conclusions, and you've laid out your position. You've respected their position and laid out their position in a fair and balanced way without too much edge to it. You're not trying to demonize them, and you've also been able to present your facts as well. And so they feel respected, they feel acknowledged, and they're a lot more receptive to hear what it is that you've got to say. And maybe again, you're not saying it directly, but it's embedded in what the characters are doing and the experiences they're having. And maybe that's the only way someone's going to experience that or get that perspective. And they don't even know that they're in for it. You write a comic about, I don't know, some demoness sorcerer, badass chick fighting, I don't know, the legions of hell. And somehow that convinced somebody that, hey, you know what? Purple fruit's not that bad.
That's the way I would go about it for sure. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah, so there's so many different jumping off places. Have you ever read I don't know. I'm a big fan of Dr. Seuss from
Oh
back when I
yeah.
was a kid and stuff. Have you ever read the Butter Battle book?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a
That's
great
like one of my
example.
yeah, that's like one of my favorite books because it's the same thing. It's like
Yep.
it's taking that like crazy politically charged type of topic, but it's about, which side of the bread do you butter? Like
Yeah.
so it's not like getting all deep or too deep. And it's interesting because what do you think about that? Because, Dr. Seuss, a lot of his books, well, I should say a few of his books have a definite point of view.
Oh yeah.
Um, do you think would you be kind of against that, or do you think he does it right?
No, I think he does it right because his point of view is more from like a human moral or ethical kind of perspective. Like you take the butter battle, for instance, and they look almost identical, except for the fact that one has a star on their stomach. But whatever that was about, a lot of people allude to the fact that maybe it was about World War II or whatever. But we'll just go for conversation's sake, we'll assume that's what it was about. He didn't illustrate one with like weird little Third Reich haircuts or something like that to like sneak in a little bit of a biased opinion on it. He approached it from more of a general human perspective. Hey, war in general sucks, and there has to be a better solution to this, And he didn't demonize one perspective or the other. He presented it as the same, literally buttering bread. There's no difference to that side. So he didn't take a side. I thought that was a much better way to approach that kind of thing. Man, I never thought I'd be talking so deeply about Dr. Seuss too. That was a deep pull, but it really applies to exactly what I'm talking about when I say have a conversation. You don't want to
Yeah.
be you don't want to jump on a pedestal and try to preach to people that people just turn off. But that's a book anybody can read, no matter how you feel about it. I feel like you get something out of that.
Yeah.
There's something there for everybody.
It's definitely affected me. Then there's also they have I would say maybe something that's a little bit more on the nose from Dr. Seuss, and maybe it's a little bit too far. I don't know. I'm curious what you think about like the Lorax.
Oh, okay. So yeah, more of an environmental concern. Hmm. It's been a while since I've actually read the Lorax, but from what I can recall, I think that was a little bit more of maybe less of well, I don't know. He definitely didn't demonize the people who were cutting down the trees, but he
Hmm.
was pleading to them to reconsider what they were doing and to think about essentially the animals living in the forest.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'd have to really look at that one again to see, but I think it doesn't quite fall in that category of preaching. Because it
Hmm.
didn't say, I really want to pull it up now, but I'm pretty sure he didn't completely say, hey, we should stop cutting down trees altogether, but just maybe slow down a bit or something. How do you remember it a little bit better?
Um, yeah, to be honest, I don't think that I remember it as well either, to really comment on it. But yeah, I feel like that had a little bit more of a stance, I think.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm a little less friendly to some of those ideas than
Mm,
I am to the Butter Battle Book ideas.
mm,
I don't know. I mean, not that I'm not like into keeping the environment good and like trying to be responsible, but I think I come at it from a very different perspective
yeah.
than a lot of other people do.
So you're not
Um,
anti-tree.
no, definitely not anti-tree.
Down with the trees.
um, so yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. So I'm curious. I'd like to hear you going a little bit into what you've been doing with Sisyphean Complex, whatever you're comfortable with, of course. When it comes to this, because you've talked a lot about wanting to have that conversation, and I'm just curious what your approach is to have that conversation and avoid being preachy and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's hard because we all have opinions about stuff and we want to interject them. So Sisyphene complex, I could tell you a lot about it without saying anything about it, actually. 'Cause it's just kind of the way that I write. I'm really most concerned with the theme whenever I'm writing, and so I it started out the comic itself started out as sort of a gimmicky kind of thing a really long time ago, but without a theme, without anything to really anchor it, it just sort of kept transforming over the years. I knew like the general premise that I wanted, but I didn't know what I wanted to say with it. And whenever that happens, I just put something on the shelf. I know I'm never going to be as invested as I need to be to finish it. So what actually got the ball rolling about a year or two ago was this idea of identity. There's a lot going on in the world that has to do with identity politics. We got a lot of social issues involving identity, people wanting to change their identity, not wanting to be defined by others, etc. I mean, you could iterate on that almost infinitely, as I'm finding since I'm writing. And so the idea is, I mean, the general premise is there to get you involved in the story is that it's like a sexy spy action noir kind of comic. That's the wrapper that it's kind of packaged in, which again is sort of a play on identity. That's something that you are going to look at and you assume you know exactly what it is that you're getting. But as you go a little bit deeper, you find that there's a little bit more to this than I thought that there was. And there's this whole exploration of identity from all different kinds of perspectives. I've got people exploring their identity in the sense of they're defined by what they do versus what they think or who they are or things like that. People who feel like their identity is based on their role within a group, whether that's society or a job or kind of a cult kind of situation. People who are defined by what they produce. So I think a lot of creative people and artists can kind of relate to that. Like, am I even a person or am I the things that I make? So I've got people dealing with that. I've got people dealing with this idea of their identity being assigned to them by somebody else. Like you're this, be that. Don't stray from that. Which I think a lot of people maybe in different professions, but I'll just generalize it and say like in the military can kind of relate to that. Like you go in an individual, but you cannot be an individual in that world. You're part of a team. You're part of a unit. Nobody is more special than the other. So a lot of those kinds of aspects. And now I have my own opinions about all kinds of stuff going on in the world that have to do with identity, and I didn't really want to give anybody those opinions. I'm not out to change anybody's mind. It's just a topic that's interesting to me that I think is affecting a lot of people, and I thought this is a great opportunity to look at that, to put that theme through a prism, see all the different avenues that come out of it and explore them, see what that's like. I'm still going to try to tell a story, so it's not just like this theme study. I'm still going to come to certain conclusions, not about what identity means for those people, but about the plot. And there is a plot to the story, but that overarching theme of identity is prevalent throughout. I've even got a whole issue dedicated to a couple characters who I'm not going to say exactly, but they're very, very, very minor characters. But it plays this role of how identity plays into morality. So at what point are you given a choice that if you make that choice, now you've crossed that line? So like the difference between, let's just say, good guy and bad guy, right? You've done so many things that others might consider bad, but you've determined that there's one line you won't cross, and once you cross that line, now you're bad. Were you bad the whole time, or are you only bad when you've made the decision to be bad? That kind of stuff. And I know all that is very general because I'm really trying to not give away too much about the story, um, but that's how I'm having that conversation. And it's amazing what you can do with just one single theme, how many different kinds of stories you can tell and how many different kinds of characters you can develop. It's become just a very enjoyable and rich experience for me, even just the research aspect of it. And just, I'm constantly having these little epiphany moments where, I experience something in life and go, oh, wow, that's another aspect of identity that I hadn't thought about. That's something that I could explore. What character could that apply to, or should I make another character? And in some cases, it's like maybe just a little bit of an aside. Maybe one interaction with somebody else that, for the reader that's paying attention to this kind of thing, maybe they'll pick it up and go, oh, that's yet another example of identity. But once again, back to the conversation aspect, none of this is being beat over the heads of the readers. We're never, I'm going to try my hardest not to even say the word identity. It's not, I don't want you to read this and in every single chapter you go, oh, this is another thing about identity. It's something that I want you to think about upon reflecting on what you've read, not necessarily like while you're reading. But yeah, so that's
Mm.
how I'm using it, and that's how I incorporated it into my book. And I think, hopefully, with what I've said, it's kind of apparent that there is a story there. There are things happening, and there's a depth to the characters. But yet, I haven't even told you anything about them. And I think that's sort of the power of that conversation and that unity with the theme that you're trying to discuss, because you have these people that are sort of playing the roles of those different perspectives that shoot off from that prism.
Yeah, it's so interesting. There's so many things. I feel like you know, it's interesting because you see this kind of, it's so weird. You see this conversation, like if you watch a lot of TV shows, if you listen to whatever content is out there, like watching TV shows, watching movies, reading books, um, you start to see actually themes in our culture, and you see this discussion happening like throughout all of these different contributions. And it's kind of interesting to me because what you're hitting on, identity and things like that, it's a pretty universal theme. That's been discussed forever, like, literally forever, but it's definitely very prevalent now. And it's like, it's almost like having, I mean, I don't know if this was really your intent, but I as a viewer, listener, reader, whatever, I can see it's almost like a reaction to some of the things that are already happening now, and being like, okay, are you want to have this discussion, or you want to talk about this, and sometimes even you want to preach about this. All right, if you want to preach about this, let's talk about this, let's have this discussion, and let's really look at it from all different sides. I think is sort of what I almost see you doing with this.
Yeah, very much so. It's funny because I didn't pick it because it's relevant to the times, but like I said a couple of years ago, I started getting interested in this idea, and I've gone to the extremes in my actual like opinion about it. And I mean, there's a lot of aspects to it. It's not just one issue. There's a lot of issues, but
Hmm.
it's funny because as I'm making this story, it's like it's becoming more and more relevant. It's something that, I thought was an interesting little thing that's become kind of like a really important thing. Like a lot of people think this is the topic. This is what we should be talking about. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it's becoming sort of a response of like, yeah, let's have a conversation about it. Um, and I'm hoping that it's received in the way that, I'm hoping it's at least received in a way that doesn't get a whole lot of blowback, because I am doing a very intentional sort of switch with the idea of the packaging and the cover art, and a lot of the inspiration for the way that the books are designed and all that is very it's sort of meant to get certain people riled up and others excited. And like I said, it's that idea of like, well, if you participate in the conversation, you'll understand why it looks this way. You'll understand why it's presented in this way. There's a reason behind all of this, and a conversation to be had about it. So in a way, it's like I hate this stupid word because it's like a buzzword now, but I guess meta in a way. I guess it's a little bit meta because the conversation is also about the book itself and how the book is presented too. That's actually a major that's the backbone. That's the main story, is actually a lot of that main character, who really is sort of in the background most of the time until much later on. You start to actually get to know her and where she's from and what she's all about and why she is the way that she is. And she's even presented with some choices about her own identity and gets to decide, how she's going to proceed. Is this who I am, or is this, can I change this?
Hmm.
I know it sounds like it's very, I don't want to mention any political themes whatsoever, but it's not. It's very general. It's literally just the exploration of identity as a concept.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. Um, it's really interesting. So, like, I would be curious on how do you how, how do you trying to have this discussion and have this conversation? Like, I know for me, I think you kind of mentioned this. It's about kind of having diversity in characters to a certain degree. I
Mhm.
don't really love using that term again, like you were saying with the meta, because there's a lot of baggage that comes with the word diversity. But I feel like having like a lot of diversity, but also like you said, like not painting one character, like the bad character as the thing you're arguing against, and the
Right,
good character as what you believe in.
right.
Um, but it's not necessarily doing flipping that either. It's kind of having all the characters have different viewpoints.
Yep.
I don't know. It's just interesting. How do you approach that?
Well, I think the influence behind how I approach it is sort of my world view, to be honest, and it's very unpopular opinion. So I'm usually very leery to even mention it, but I truly don't believe that anybody is entirely evil or entirely good. I think most people, even the worst, go about what they're doing with the best of intentions. It's not it's not about evil or anything. It's about they genuinely feel like they're doing, God's work, for lack of a better term. This is going to make a better world for my people, and they're not necessarily concerned about other people. And so I think that way of looking at things, whether you truly believe it or whether you just put yourself in the mindset to create characters, is kind of a good place to be in if you want to go the conversation route. Because you I like evil characters, bad guys who you can almost see where they're coming from. Or if you can't, even if you don't agree with them, you can see how they got there, and you can almost see the little milestone, pivotal moments in their life where you feel like, well, I would have made a different decision, but he didn't. And that's in your head. So that's something that you've just got out of the story that maybe the author didn't intend, but that's that's a good moment in a story, I think. A moment when you can interject and say, well, he should have done that, and then that wouldn't happen. Boom. You've just made your own parable from my story, you know? I think that is way more powerful than beating someone over the head and telling them how they're supposed to feel about what it is that you're writing. You know, you present people as people, three-dimensional people with real problems, real motivations, things that actually make sense. And one of the tools that I use to try to help me create characters that are like that is Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. It's like the food pyramid, but for life, I guess. And so, and I believe in it, and a lot of psychologists use it for their therapy and whatever to try to help people figure out maybe why their life is in balance. And it's pretty much it's kind of common sense when you actually look at it. Like on the bottom, you've got your very, very basic needs like food and shelter and safety and all that kind of stuff. And then as you get higher and higher up, you get more towards like the luxury needs, like self-actualization and you know, having friends or being rewarded for the things you do, stuff like that. You know, when we were cavemen, we weren't handing out trophies. It was just eat, sleep, find shelter, procreate. And we're still very much adhered to that pyramid, you know? And so I think good motivation acknowledges that, you know, you can't have a character, if you're going to make it imbalanced, you should at least know why it's imbalanced. And so maybe this character is pursuing self-actualization, you know, they're trying to dominate the world, we'll say, but they don't have their basic needs met. They have no friends, they have no family, they're not putting food on the table, they've got no money, all that kind of stuff. And it creates this emotional conflict, like a psychological conflict of just having your priorities backwards. And as long as you know that, you could build a story around that to highlight that in that character, you know? So I don't know if I answered the question, but I definitely went off on a tangent about something.
That's
sorry.
No, that's totally okay. Tangents are welcome for sure, especially when we're talking about story.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I mean, yeah, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is definitely something I've thought a lot about as well. I think it's interesting with story is we have an opportunity. It's weird because story has a lot of power. It's actually probably one of the most powerful things, in my opinion. And so much so that even, you know, marketers and politicians will try to inject story into what they're doing purposefully to influence people.
Yeah.
And you know, those who are good at storytelling do better, you know, in those arenas. And so it's weird because us as artists, as creative people, as people who look at the world, I feel like, I mean, every artist is different, but I know for you and me, I feel like you and I share this. We kind of look at the world and we like to see, you know, we see the black and whites maybe we've seen in a black and white way before, but we start to see all the gray areas and we feel like there's more to express maybe. There's more questions to ask, more things to discuss. So I think you and I probably approach things in that similar way. But you know, story, the thing is story is that powerful and it is that influential, and it's easy to take that power and you, I mean, literally, you know, are you going to use the power for good? Are you going to use it for bad? Are you going
Yeah.
to, you know, what are you going to do with that power, you know? And first of all, we're just trying to get to the point where we can even use the power in a way that is effective because we want to be good storytellers. You know, it's not because we're trying to, you know, change, you know, take over the world, except for in an artistic way, maybe. But you know, I don't know. It's just, I guess I'm curious. You know, do you feel like we have like a special responsibility to be careful with that?
Hmm. Yeah. That's just my personal opinion, though, and I know people won't necessarily agree with that, but I do actually, and I there's somebody who really kind of changed my mind about this was Dave Kellett from I'm having trouble remembering the strip that he does. I feel bad about it. But anyways, he had a podcast a number of years ago with a bunch of comic strip artists, web comic artists, and he had said something that it's not exactly what we're talking about, but it's in the same ballpark, and it relates, and it does. I promise it'll make sense in some way. So I actually have the quote right here. That's how important it is to me. So he said, as a cartoonist, you are an entertainer. You have a professional responsibility to make people forget about the worries of their day, not to introduce yours into their life. And now this is coming from a comic strip artist. So you have to put that in context. You're talking Sunday funnies, you're talking, cyanide and happiness, the stuff that shows up in your feed that, is supposed to make you laugh 90% of the time, and maybe 10% of the time they throw in a little somber statement about something that's happening in the world that's affecting everybody. So that's a biased viewpoint from somebody who's essentially supposed to be entertaining you primarily. Comic artists in general, I mean, I guess it really depends, because I want to make the distinction between commercial artist and fine artist, because if you're a fine artist, you do whatever sorry, I don't know if you swear. You can do whatever the heck you want if you're a fine artist, because that's just pure artistic expression. That's not You're not catering to an audience. You're not catering to even an industry. You're just making art for art's sake. So that's very different. Make your statements, be political, be bold, get people's attention, whatever it is you got to do. It's a completely different world. But commercial art that you want to sell, I feel like it's a little different world. I agree with Dave that you do have a responsibility. You are an entertainer in some way, shape, or form. And you could see people kind of lash out at entertainers that don't walk that line as well. And now everybody's human, though, and like you were talking about the gray areas, you could have a gray area between commercial artists and fine artists. You could be a commercial artist and still be a fine artist. You could be both. You could be anywhere on the spectrum there. There's a lot of artists who try to say a lot more than some even believe the medium can handle at times. And I think those are maybe some of the greatest works that we've had. But yeah, I do think at the end of the day, in general, you do have a responsibility to be aware of what's going on. And if you are going to present those kind of, we'll just say radical ideas, meaning ideas that are likely to get people worked up, you have a responsibility to handle those with care. You don't want to alienate any aspect of your audience, whether they're on the side of that ideology that you believe in or not. You don't want to alienate people. At the end of the day, you got to deliver Batman on time. People want Batman. Sometimes interjecting too much of your own personal ideology into something and not handling it like a conversation, but instead handling it like a slap in the face, like you're shaking somebody and pointing your finger at them. I don't think that's quite the right way to go about it, because you are going to alienate your audience. You are going to drive people away from the book, and then it's no longer entertainment, it's propaganda. And there's nothing wrong with propaganda either. It's just there's a time and a place, and it's not always in the mainstream to do that kind of thing. But this is how kind of indecisive I am on this subject, is I can understand from an artistic point of view how you would want to subvert that expectation and inject that into the mainstream, because it's going to reach the wider audience. It's going to invoke that conversation, maybe not in the way that's the most pleasant to have, but it's going to get people arguing, and it's going to get people fighting on Twitter and Facebook about that latest issue of Spider-Man or Captain Marvel or whatever. And maybe mission accomplished. Maybe that was it. You needed people to start having that conversation. I personally like the more subtle approach, the more diplomatic approach. Sometimes my grandfather had this saying that was really funny, and it fit perfectly with this picture that I found of him and my grandmother. But he was trying to teach me how to be diplomatic when I was really little, and he said, he said, Tiger, you got to learn, how to talk to people. It's not always what you say, but it's how you say it. You might see a girl, she's not the prettiest girl. You go up to her, you say, hey, baby. Some people might say your face is so ugly it could stop a clock. But when I look in your eyes, time stands still. So it's not exactly what you say, it's how you say it. The one sounds really sweet, but it's saying the exact same thing. And that's generally how I approach these things. I get why people would want to do it the one way, but I think there's a more subtle and diplomatic way to do it that is more appropriate in more cases than not. I think you can make arguments for the other, but I think the other is always a good way to go. So
yeah, it's interesting. I think that one thing that's interesting, and I've heard this comment, and it's really interesting, is how many times can I say interesting?
Very interesting. How many times you say interesting?
Exactly. There's a lot of people talking, especially nowadays. I mean, I guess it's always been the case, but on the internet, it makes people talk in ways they wouldn't normally talk in real life.
Oh yeah.
So they have a lot. They feel that they can talk a lot more. So there's a lot of people talking, and it seems like there's little to no listening going on sometimes.
Yeah.
And I was actually, it was funny. I was in a very weird, like not very politically charged, but I witnessed a conversation this week at work where, and I had no choice but to witness it. I was working in a warehouse, far away from the conversation, but I could hear it loud and clear. And it was outside, and it was some of my coworkers and stuff, and there was a guy like fixing the forklift. So it was about sports. Everybody's got their team they love or whatever, blah blah blah, and they were just going at it. And one person would bring up one point, and they'd be like, "But ah," and then the other person bring up one point and be like, "No, but ah." It was just like, wow, this was heated, and and I was like, so I'm like, but this was a case where everybody wanted to be heard, but nobody wanted to listen.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's so unproductive. But one thing that's interesting, again, with story, with comics, with writing, whatever, you can. I think this is a big part of why I love creating things, creating stories, creating comics, because I've always been the type of person who's very quiet in public. And when I do try to talk, I feel like I'm stepping over people, or I feel like I can't get a word in edgewise. A lot of people are just better at talking than I am. And so I feel, and I never like to argue with people, because I know in that environment I won't do well. I won't be able to bring my point across. And when I get heated, especially, I'm gonna be more likely to try to jab somebody with something that'll hurt them, but won't actually tell the point that I'm trying to make.
Right.
So there's just so many things that don't go well in that situation. But I think I've always, gravitated towards, my music with writing rhymes and stuff, doing hip hop and stuff, or with comics and making stories. I gravitate to that because I can take the time to present the message the way I would like it to be presented. And whoever's going to listen to it, watch it, whatever, they're all ears. They can't talk back. So this is
true.
In some ways, it's a very like selfish thing. And you can take that approach and start telling people things and preaching. And I still haven't taken that approach. It's not like I feel like my view is right and I need to get it across to the world to make the world a better place. It's like, I just want to be part of the discussion. I want my voice to be heard. And this is an opportunity for that,
Totally. Yeah. Somebody had actually said in the chat about I can't find it now, but let's see. Oh yeah. William W. that artists should have the right to express a point of view, and that comics have done that for a long time. I completely agree with that too, and for the exact reason that you just said. Like sometimes that's the best way to get the message that you have out. And along that same line of like starting the conversation, maybe the conversation doesn't happen in the book, but maybe the book starts the conversation, and I think that's totally valid too. There is a time and a place where sometimes you have to make a statement, and TV shows have done it, movies have done it. Artists traditionally have been the people to start those conversations, to get them thinking about it. You got graffiti and even little, zines and flyers and stuff. That's creative people that are getting a message out in a creative way in an otherwise hostile environment that doesn't want to hear it. It's a little easier to like you said, formulate your thoughts, get it down exactly how you want to say it, and then present it. That's way better than just getting into a shouting match and not being heard, etc. But again, I go back to, I feel like the best way, in my opinion, I'm not saying it's the only way or that I'm even right, but the way that I feel the best way to do that is to do it in a way that the widest possible audience is going to be receptive to hearing you out. And I feel like the best way to do that is often in a subversive kind of way, in a way that they don't know what they're getting into right off the bat. A lot of people look at covers of comics these days and immediately prejudge and can imagine what they're getting into, or I'll admit, and I mean, some of these causes, I think I'm on their side, but I'm not on the side of how they're delivering their message, if that makes sense. Like a lot of people have brought up Marvel, and I kind of agree. I wasn't reading comics for quite a long time, and the ones that I was reading more indies. Let me rephrase that. I wasn't reading superhero comics for a long time. I was reading different comics. But when I started getting back into superhero comics kind of recently, they're different. I mean, I was trying to read the Green Arrow because it's one of my favorites, and he literally said, like verbatim, he said, "Well, that's because I'm a social justice warrior." I was like, what?
Wow.
Like that's like literally beating someone over the head with it. And now I'm not entirely conservative. I'm not entirely liberal. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I guess I'm liberal leaning. But I'm more of a centrist. But even for me, I was like, come on, this is stupid. Like, that's just blatantly political. But he's right. If any character were, yeah, Green Arrow is totally a social justice hero. Always has been, even before the word was invented or the term was invented. But still, in this day and age, during this climate, it's a great way to completely alienate your audience. If I were a conservative, if I were one of those people who's, down with SJWs, I'm done. I'm not reading any more Green Arrow. He could have been doing, acts of social justice without, flying that flag in defiance. And maybe that was a good thing. Maybe someone else's perspective is that's the way it should be done. You should be proud of it and you got to fight. I don't think so. I think especially in comics, I think it's a little better if we all kind of come together and enjoy this medium for what it is. And if you got a message, sneak it in there, get it in there in a way that doesn't completely drive away those people who actually need to hear it. It goes back to the echo chamber thing, like if I were a staunch conservative and I saw, a cover of Green Arrow that said Green Arrow, the social justice warrior, pass, not reading it. But maybe I'm your audience that you feel needs to hear this message. Well, then you've just completely defeated the purpose of even making the comic at all.
Yeah.
That's just...
Yeah, it's like if you want to get a message across to somebody who opposes you, it's like, don't start insulting them first. Like, right. That's not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I've been having a conversation with a friend of mine, and one of the things I brought up that he totally agreed with was, I'm learning how to write stories. I'm doing my best to learn. And, I care a lot about bringing across a good story, even way before like my point of view. Like if it's not a good story, it's not worth doing, So, I actually think it's funny because I study that, I feel like I could actually make the points that an SJW again, I use that term like with air quotes or whatever,
Sure.
but like, that somebody who's known as an SJW, I feel like I could make their story better than they could. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Not that I'm like the greatest storyteller in the world, but I would, just because for the pure fact that I would approach it as, let's make a great story. Let's not make a plot and then insert my politics into it. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's a difference, and I feel like there's interesting ways that you could kind of do that, and also to the point of like, getting people to hear like, I've never been against really anybody, but I grew up with a lot of biases around me and
Mhm.
stuff like that. And just like everybody, we're in a very different time than we were when I think you and I both were growing up, even though
Oh
you're a little bit younger than me.
yeah.
Um, and, there's certain words that were thrown around 10, 15, 20 years ago that if
Oh
you
yeah.
say those things now, you get in a lot of trouble.
Oh yeah.
Um, but one of these things, the whole, homosexuality stuff, and I'm not trying to bring up that debate or anything, but I always bring up this example because, things like Will and Grace, like that
Mm.
was a funny show. I got into that show because it was hilarious. I still remember the things and quote the things that the characters said and did, um, from back when I used to watch it. And I'm a conservative Christian. Like,
Not the target audience.
I'm not the target audience, but maybe I was the target audience. It warmed me up to think, you know
There
what?
you go. Yeah.
Maybe I need to not just like, maybe I need to stop like say like being okay with certain things that,
Mm-hmm.
I'm learning about through, maybe not through that, but through stuff after that. Like, okay, like now I get what the issue is. Like a big part of the issue is like bullying and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
it's like there was like a thing before that where it's like, okay, everybody's free to do whatever, but I don't want to know about it type of thing or
Mm.
whatever. And now it's like, well, it's okay for people to be kind of out there about it, and there shouldn't be this bullying. Even if you
Right.
disagree with something that somebody does, it doesn't mean it gives you the right to hurt them and harm them and insult them and do whatever these things are.
Mm.
So that, I don't know, not that I was doing that, because I'm not, again, I never like was against anybody anyways,
Yeah.
but the culture was a certain way at that point, and I think we all kind of got to a better place, as a culture, with some of these issues like that, for example. Um, but at the same time, there's always like this big pendulum swing where you have like, okay, that, but then it's like, okay, now that side is maybe going to be more militant and more like in your face, or forceful about their things, and it's like both ways. It just, I guess it's just the way the world works. But I don't know why I'm really getting onto that so much, but I guess the biggest point is I've had stories in my life, movies, TV shows, whatever, that have, if it hasn't changed my view, it's made me more empathetic to a certain point of view that before I just kind of wrote off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's something awesome about story, personally.
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially when you're younger, I think you're a lot more receptive to messages in literature and art and everything because you're still learning about the world and absorbing everything and trying to kind of formulate your identity and how you feel about stuff. And so those messages kind of stick out a little bit more. And then I feel like as you get older, you still notice them, but you already have an opinion. You're not necessarily looking to have your mind changed, so it affects you a little differently, and change is hard. I think to tack on to what you were saying, I think one of the biggest differences between like right now and when you and I were growing up, which is roughly around the same time, um, there was this kill them with kindness kind of attitude that was still in play, where people weren't necessarily trying to fight people; they were trying to get them used to new ideas, slowly interject, you know, new ways of thinking. And a lot of that happened through television, actually. I mean, shows like Perfect Strangers were kind of created to casually introduce the idea of immigrants from another country being cool, and we're okay with that, right? Right? And for the most part, it did. There was a different tone, and yeah, there was still blatant racism. There was still prejudices, and it came out in like little ways that, you know, aren't definitely aren't the best, but it was slow progress, very, very slow, painfully slow in some cases, but it was still progress. Whereas now we go and we fight back. So instead of killing with kindness, punch them in the nose. And it is just amazing how fast you can regress from aggression compared to that kindness kind of approach. I see like a huge difference in like 80s movies compared to now. Not saying that was a greater time or anything, but just the way that diversity aspect was presented and different issues were presented. It was much more of a, hey, let's get along, and, you know, not necessarily even talking about the issues, just presenting another world where things are different, you know. Whereas these days, I think it is a little bit more of a fight. And I see a lot more severe pushback. It's like, all right, fine, we tried. Let's go back to the Civil War era. What? Like, that was extreme. I mean, it's amazing. But I mean, that's a psychological thing. Humans are much more apt to, we respond much more intensely to negative things than positive things. You know, like if somebody gives you a compliment, no, okay, cool, thanks. If somebody even insults you the slightest little bit, you're going to dwell on that for a day, 2, 3, maybe a week. Maybe you remember it a month from now. Hey, remember when that asshole called me a jerk at that mall 5 years ago? Man, what a douchebag. Like, I don't know. We're just hardwired to focus on the negative. So I think that kind of goes along with my attitude towards storytelling, is I try to approach it in a positive way. And that's kind of where the conversation idea comes from. Is I feel like that's something that's at the very least not going to insult and alienate the people that I'm trying to get through to, you know. Less apprehensive about what it is that I do have to say, if I have to say anything at all.
Yeah. So yeah, I think just as a even if you are trying to get a point across, you know, the strategy of telling people and shouting is it's just not the greatest strategy, really, you know. And if you can open up a discussion, I think that you can make more headway anyways. But I'm curious too, like, have you ever flirted with the idea of having a very intentional message in a story? I mean, I know you're a fan of, like, you know, old yeah, I guess it's 80s cartoons like He-Man and stuff like that. Is that 80s or 90s? I don't even know.
Yeah, it's like, mid to late
But
80s.
yeah, so it's like 80s and GI Joe well, I don't know if I've heard you talk about GI Joe, but I would imagine if you're into like He-Man and
Yeah.
and those had messages, you know, especially at the end. Like, they were really obvious about it at the end, and I think that yes. I think they were, in some ways, they were forced to have messages by, you know, the stations or whatever it is that they worked for. But you know, have you ever flirted with the idea of having an intentional message, a very intentional? Because there's certain ways, like, for the most part, I'm the type of guy who wants to have a discussion, but there are certain messages I would even in almost like a like, again, being a Christian, I've been very much seen like the Bible tract and the chick tracts and stuff. I would very much love to play around in that world, but I think it would be interesting. It would be interesting, trust me, because it wouldn't be like me saying, well, this person's going to hell, that person's going to hell. Like, that's kind of the gist of some chick tracts, unfortunately. But, you know, I don't know. I have some other ideas. But anyways, still, just, have you ever flirted with the idea of having a more intentional approach to a story?
Definitely. I think it also depends on the age group that you're writing for too. For kids, there's quite a few kind of objective moral stances that you can pass on to them. Anti-violence, don't kill people, don't hurt people, be kind, that kind of stuff, I think is very kind of universal for the kinds of things that we like to teach our kids, or at least the greater majority thinks is like, yeah, this is how you raise the foundational human. After that, there's variations, but there's certain basic fundamentals. And so for things like that, I think, parables like Aesop's fables, and even a lot of the stories from the Bible and mythology are somewhat, if not very, universal, and can be told in a way that's objective and easily received by all kinds of people. Um, in fact, there's just one single point like that I'm making in my comic, and it's something that I genuinely believe, but it's buried in there, and it's nothing overly controversial. It's a very general kind of statement, my worldview essentially, and my opinion about conspiracy theories and shadow governments and tinfoil hat kind of subjects. It's not wholly my opinion, but it's actually something that Alan Moore said that really brought me comfort at a time in my life when I was getting a little overwhelmed with the world. This was like around the time when Anonymous was a new thing, and no one knew what the hell they even were or what this was. It was just, oh, there's masked people trying to topple governments, and oh, this is an interesting world we live in now. And it was freaking me out, to be honest. And there was the whole Occupy Wall Street thing going on, and I lived in Chicago, so I mean, I saw these mass gatherings of freaking crazy people, trying to take down the government. Essentially, it was nuts, and destroying my city in the process. It was crazy. I believe in protest, I believe in free speech, but trying to take down light posts and kicking off traffic lights and throwing them into the river, that's crazy to me. I was like, I don't know what, like, I believe in what they're talking about, but I definitely don't agree with the way they're going about it. And at the time, Alan Moore had done an interview with, I'm trying to remember who. I'm a big fan of Alan Moore. He's weird as hell. I love the guy. But he had said something about this idea of, well, he was talking about conspiracies and stuff. Somebody had brought it up, and his, fascination with the occult and things like that, and if he believed in any of these kinds of things, especially considering his book, V for Vendetta. And it was a lot about his role in sort of creating Anonymous in a way in which he hates when anybody takes any of his stuff for any reason. So it doesn't matter who it is. He was just like, yeah, fuck those guys. But he had said, like, his worldview, and I have adopted this since then, is that, a lot of people think that we have a hard time coming to terms with reality, and just, it's just so immense. It's too big for us to contemplate this whole thing. So we try to find the simplest explanation. Usually that's like, oh, well, there's some mass organization that's in charge of everything, pulling the strings. It's a boardroom of 5 people, and they control everything. And this idea of control, humans are obsessed with control because we feel like we need control. So we assume, well, somebody must be in control. I'm not, when in reality, the more likely scenario is that nobody's in control. We're all just regular people making it up as we go, and all the evils and travesties in the world are the result of oversight and ignorance and lack of experience with situations that we're put into. Our government is just as inept as we are. Like, we're just people. Nobody's any more equipped to, no human being is so smart that they could run this world, and it gave me comfort knowing that, okay, yeah, I can get that. The idea of chaos, it's just people trying to make this whole thing work and kind of filling in roles and pretending, what it's again, it kind of fits in with this idea of identity that I'm exploring in the book, like, what is a police officer? What is a journalist? What is an artist? Those are identities we assign, and we put on the costume and we play the part. But are we that? Like, are we really that? And so, it's that overcomplicated the question. But yes, I have definitely flirted with the idea of putting in a specific message. And in Sisyphean Complex, that's one thing that I did want to address very directly is this idea of things maybe not always being what they seem, you know? And sometimes we can get very worked up and very passionate about a plight or a cause or something, and we create an enemy to fight. And what do you do with your life when you realize the enemy isn't there? It's very similar to like the Wizard of Oz thing, you know? Like they have that whole quest to get to the wizard, and they pull the curtain, and he's just a dude. Like, I mean, let that settle in for a minute. Like, holy shit, what have I been doing? Like, what if the Area 51 people, you know, stormed Area 51, and it's just a bunch of Marines having coffee in the rec room doing nothing? Like, nothing's happening. Okay, we got this secret prototype ship that we're working on, but no aliens, sorry. You know, which I'm not saying either way. I want to believe. I'm with Mulder. I want to believe, but you know, that idea, that's something that's very a definite message that I'm trying to deliver in that book. But then my characters deal with it in this way of identity, not necessarily a preachy thing of like you should feel this way, but it's more of the backbone that kicks off some of their what ifs. You know, all right, you think you're this and you think you're fighting that, but if that isn't real, now what? What are you? Who are you without that cause, without that fight? That's a big, major part of one of the main characters' storylines.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think you make a good point with, you know, there's certain things that we can kind of all agree on to a certain extent, or that are at the very least a lot less toxic of a conversation to have, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know, kind of like the message of like not being lazy and taking action. You know, like that's one that I discuss a lot, you know, on videos and stuff.
Totally.
And there's nothing, I think that's a really cool conversation to have. But you know, I've also taken it to the point of, you know, quantity versus quality. Okay, now we're starting to get a little bit more into like the people have opinions and stuff like that. But it's still like so far away from like, you know, abortion or no abortion. Like, you know,
True.
It's not such a bit. So you can kind of have a point of view, I feel like, on some of those lesser, you know, things and be really strong with that. Like, so yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of examples. So I think it's interesting. You can be very opinionated in certain things. And I mean, you can be opinionated whatever you want. You can make propaganda, and actually, propaganda isn't always bad. Propaganda has a bad connotation, but you know, everything's propaganda. Like even the way I make my YouTube is present you to want to eventually get my comic at some point. I mean, it's not what it's only what it's for. I try to bring value for value's sake in these YouTube videos, but I am also trying to build trust and things like that. So, you know, so there's propaganda everywhere. Like every time you've seen an American flag, that's propaganda, you know, like, is it bad? I don't know. I don't think so, but sometimes I could see how somebody might think it's bad, you know. So, you know, it is what it is. We're all influencing people. We're all influencing somebody. And whether we even know it or not. There's been a lot of great comments. William W. put a lot of very thoughtful things in there. Thank you, everybody who's been in there hanging out. Let's see. There's some kind of unrelated questions. There was somebody who, I think William said he checked out your Instagram, Mike, and he said it's really cool.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Which I think is awesome. And I like what you said about there are storytelling goals. Not everything has to be Spiegelman's mouse, but the world is better for Spiegelman's work. Yeah, that's a really good way of saying it. I think. And, you know, I think of things like, you know, I think of like Martin Luther King or something like that, you know, like what more positive influence it was there at that time. Like that was such a great, a great influence, I think, to the world. He was, and he was very um, message oriented in everything he did. Obviously,
Yep.
he was. It was a movement. It was, they were trying to get people to act, and I don't think that was a bad thing. Personally.
No.
Um, so it's just interesting where these kind of things can go, and I really like the fact that in some of that you've kind of brought into the discussion about the stuff you're doing, having a conversation. It's an interesting way to think about approaching writing a story for comics and everything. So I think we've circled around this. There's definitely more that can be said, more that
Well,
can be
always.
discussed. We could always revisit it sometime, but really appreciate you coming on, Mike, and hanging out with me talking about this.
Anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, where can people find you if they haven't heard in the beginning?
I've got a solution to this. I'm going to do a screen share.
Oh boy.
I've never done it on this platform, so.
Oh yeah, I'll have to make sure I press on it. Yep. No, it'll go. One sec.
Go. Boom. That's how you spell it.
So bookmark that link, and there will be some cool content there eventually. And hey, patreon.com.
Yeah,
interesting.
I forgot. I'm not like really trying to plug it, but it's honestly the only place that you can really see anything at all about this comic that I'm working on. And I'm planning to start doing some videos on there soon too, kind of sort of like this conversation that Marsha and I had, but me by myself going on for hours. So if you're into that kind of thing, and maybe not hours, but I do have several videos that I've done in kind of like a private experimental kind of way with a group of people, kind of getting into that sort of stuff about character development, story development stuff. And I forgot until just now when someone asked me where they could find my stuff and what the thing was called. So yeah, that's where all that stuff's going. And
so those videos are on Patreon?
They will be. This was I wanted to get my sea legs before I started actually making like legit more polished videos to post on Patreon. But yeah, my patrons have access to all of those as well. Actually, they've been able to be a part of that process, and I've got all my concept art and whatnot too. So
I will say, like, I mean, and I'm not just saying this, like, I try to promote everybody who comes on, and I really believe in everybody who comes on. And I will also say that Mr. Mike Emeritz, like, if you watch his videos, if you check out this the content he's talking about, I've seen a lot of it. I still have to catch up on some of it, and this is no joke. Good stuff. Like, this is stuff that you will gain some helpful tips and stuff from. So I definitely want to say check that out, because it's worth it. And also, even just the Instagram for free, like, he has the same type of stuff on his Instagram videos and stuff too. So definitely check that out. What's that?
Especially when I'm working on a project, like all the Goblin stuff and the Julie Jupiter stuff, I try to post a lot of what it is that I'm doing and why. I don't really like just showing work. Like, I kind of like showing a lot of like why I'm doing what I'm doing kind of stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's really helpful too. That's the type of insights that you don't get from just asking, what kind of pen do you use,
Yeah.
So awesome. So, and you guys know where you can find me, donkeyjawprojects.com, and Marsh Comics on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, which I love. I freaking
I forgot about that.
I freaking love that app so much. Like, that's like my favorite social media right now. It's just
checked
too
it out.
funny.
There's some crazy stuff on there. It's kind of like Vine, but a little better than Vine was.
That's basically what it is, yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of dumb stuff on there, but there's a lot of just funny stuff. Like, just look in the hashtag comedy, and you'll find. I mean, every day I get a laugh out of that thing. So Not only is it fun to watch, but I also been trying to create some cool stuff on there, and it's a great way for artists, for you artists out there. Like, what a better way to, you know, kind of display your art than having like little 15 to 60-second videos. Just there, it usually involves music or some kind of funny gag, and it creates excitement about what you're doing, and I think it's fun. So
Cool.
check it out. Other than that, man, thanks again, Mike, and thank you everybody in the chat and in the replay. I'm sure you guys have some really cool comments to hit up the comment section with. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
And other than that, you know, thank you, and we'll talk to you on the next one.
Peace.
Later.